In a quiet corner of New England, where each morning begins with the soft light of the rising sun, Vivian woke up in a familiar rhythm honed over the years. Her home, cozy and tidy, seemed to reflect the calmness and stability she cherished. Her daily routine was sacred. The morning hours in the garden, where various flowers and shrubs grew, had become a symbol of her life, full of attention to detail and order. Every morning, Vivian would go out to the small veranda, framed by neatly trimmed bushes, and greet the dawn. She admired the freshness of the dew on the rose petals and the scent of jasmine that permeated even through the slightly dusty window glass. Here, in the quiet of the early morning, she found moments to reflect on the past years, on how time flows relentlessly, leaving behind both memories and fleeting glimpses of longing for something new. Vivian always loved reading historical novels, and the daylight in her study, flooding the room with golden rays, created an atmosphere of quiet concentration. The pages of books seemed to come alive in her hands, transporting her to distant eras where people's fates intertwined in a whirlwind of dramatic events. But behind the outwardly compliant routine lay something more, a quiet sense of inner emptiness that occasionally made itself known, like an unnoticed echo of a long-forgotten desire for change. Evenings were always a time when the home was filled with family warmth. Grace and her husband, with whom she had lived for more than 3 decades, always tried to create an atmosphere of coziness, a shared dinner at the table, quiet conversations about the past day, light laughter, and the melodic clinking of dishes. He was a symbol of stability for Vivian, a reminder of those long years filled with mutual support and understanding. Together they enjoyed the familiar evenings, full of quiet harmony, where every detail seemed perfected to perfection. However, lately, something elusive had begun to stir in her heart. Perhaps it was just a reflection of the changes that come with age, or a quiet desire to experience something new, to break free from the shackles of routine. These thoughts, barely perceptible and fleeting, awoke questions in Vivian about whether her life was truly fulfilled or if, deep down, a missing spark remained hidden. One evening after another peaceful day, when the shadows had begun to lengthen and the wind gently rustled outside, Grayson returned home with news. He held a neatly folded note in his hand, an invitation to dinner at his longtime colleague, Spencer, a man whose charisma and light humor always enlivened any gathering. Spencer, as Grayson recounted, was not only successful, but also possessed a keen sense of tact, able to create an atmosphere of warmth and coziness. By his side was always his wife, Avery, an elegant and kind woman whose gaze could melt even the coldest evening. The news of this invitation seemed to penetrate the very depths of Vivian's soul. Her familiar world, so carefully constructed over the years, was suddenly filled with vague expectations and a slight anxiety. This unexpected opportunity to step outside the ordinary, to immerse herself in an atmosphere of unfamiliar encounters and unexpected emotions, made her heart race. She couldn't help but wonder, could this event be the spark that would reignite the long-extinguished fire of change? In the evening, when the soft light of the lamps gently illuminated the interior of the house, Vivian, sitting by the fireplace with a cup of fragrant tea, thoughtfully gazed into the flames. Her thoughts were full of questions about the meaning of routine, about how deeply rooted habits can hide a calling desire for change. And although she loved her familiar world, within her, a thirst for new experiences was awakening, a quiet call that promised to overturn the established order of things. Thus, on this quiet evening in the house, where everything seemed familiar and calm, a sense of the inevitable was born. The invitation to dinner at Spencer's became not just a reason for a meeting, it became a symbol of a transitional moment when the ordinary could give way to unexpected encounters and a new understanding of life. And in Vivian's heart, the thought had already quietly begun to take shape. Perhaps it was time to open the door to change and give herself a chance to taste life anew. This quiet, almost imperceptible crack in the perfect facade of her world foreshadowed a storm of emotions that was about to unfold in the coming days. The American coolness of the evening, the flickering fire in the fireplace, and the gentle rustling of leaves outside served as the backdrop for Vivian, who might soon take the first step on the path to reevaluating her life. where the familiar and the inevitable collide with the call of the heart. In the evening, when twilight enveloped the suburbs and the soft light of the street lamps began to penetrate the windows, Vivian and Grayson arrived at Spencer's house. Even from the threshold, an atmosphere of coziness and elegance was felt. The warm light of the lanterns reflected in the shiny glass showcases, and the scent of freshly cut grass and jasmine, wafting from the neatly landscaped garden, promised an unforgettable evening. At the entrance, they were greeted by Avery, a hospitable yet incredibly graceful woman whose welcoming gaze instantly melted any doubts. "Welcome, Vivian Grayson," she said, gently embracing the guests. Avery had a way of making everyone feel special and needed, and her warmth immediately enveloped Vivian, making her forget her slight anxieties. Spencer's house was stunning in its interior. Elegant furniture arranged to make every corner breathe tranquility, candles flickering on the table, and soft yet penetrating jazz music coming from hidden speakers created the feeling that time itself had slowed down. The air was filled with the aroma of fresh herbs and garlic coming from the kitchen, where the chef lovingly prepared dinner for the guests. At the large round table, adorned with an elegant tablecloth and light decorative elements in pastel shades, the conversation quickly took on a friendly and relaxed tone. Spencer, a man with a casual elegance and silver streaks in his hair, sat across from Vivian. His deep, confident voice and genuine smiles made everyone listen to him as if he were telling a story that couldn't be missed. "Vivian, I've heard that your roses are a true fairy tale," he said with a hint of a smile, pouring a glass of rich red wine that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. His eyes lingered on her for a moment, and in that gaze was something indescribable, a mix of admiration and tender curiosity. Vivian blushed slightly from the unexpected compliment, but smiled and replied, "Oh, I wouldn't call myself a genius. I just pay attention to the details." She tried to maintain her composure, though inside a spark seemed to ignite. The conversation flowed easily and naturally. Grayson, always attentive and calm, listened with interest to Spencer's stories about his recent business trip, while Avery interjected with her witty and humorous comments, creating an atmosphere of joy and comfort. At the table, laughter and conversation blended with the melodies of jazz, turning dinner into a true ritual of enjoying the moment. Meanwhile, Spencer's gaze increasingly lingered on Vivian, and in his tone began to appear notes of subtle intrigue. When dessert was served, an exquisite chocolate mousse adorned with fresh raspberries, he leaned in slightly and said, "Vivian, your gardening advice is a treasure trove of knowledge. My roses clearly lack your mastery." His words sounded as if he were not only complimenting her, but also trying to establish a subtle connection, to touch not only her mind but also her heart. At that moment, Vivian felt a slight warmth spread across her cheeks, and inside a mix of gratitude and slight embarrassment sparkled. The dialogue continued, and each new exchange of remarks created an increasingly obvious tension, innocent yet filled with hidden subtext. Grayson, immersed in his story about business meetings, did not notice the subtle changes in the atmosphere, while Vivian, balancing between loyalty to her family life and the unexpected awakening of feelings, involuntarily listened to every word Spencer said. With each minute, the evening became more multifaceted. Soft laughter, the aroma of wine, and gentle jazz created an illusion of tranquility, while subtle glances and barely perceptible touches began to ask the question, what lay hidden behind the mask of an ordinary dinner? This elusive boundary between friendship and something deeper slowly but surely awoke in Vivian's heart those feelings that she had long thought she had lost. Thus, in the coziness of Spencer's home, amid muffled voices and warm lights, the first conflict was born, not loud but deep, penetrating the very soul. Vivian could no longer fail to notice how her inner world was beginning to change. Familiar rhythms were replaced by a new melody, and every word from Spencer made her wonder how thin the line was between loyalty and a sincere desire for change. When the last sounds of dinner dissolved into the soft evening hum, Vivian, feeling a slight excitement, left the dining room and headed to the spacious terrace of Spencer's house. The sky was already adorned with the silver light of the moon, and the gentle glow of the night penetrated through the elegant hedges of the garden, turning it into a magical place where every detail breathed mystery. A peaceful silence reigned on the terrace, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant singing of crickets. A gentle breeze softly touched the delicate rose petals, spreading their scent throughout the area. In this twilight, Vivian felt her inner world beginning to stir from the unexpected awakening of long-forgotten feelings. Spencer, having left the guests in the house, gently approached her. His gaze, calm and attentive, reflected not only confidence, but also something more, a quiet request to share a moment of solitude. He extended his hand, inviting her to follow him along the winding path between neatly trimmed bushes and blooming flower beds. "Look at these roses," he said softly, stopping by a row of bushes whose petals shimmered in the moonlight. "Notice how the edges of the petals are beginning to fade? It seems they lack attention and care. Like many of us, don't you think?" Vivian looked closely, sensing that in every delicate line and gentle curve of nature lay a story. Her voice, initially barely audible, broke through the silence. "Yes, perhaps even in the garden, there are moments of oblivion when beauty begins to fade. But is it enough just to water them, or do they need to be cared for with soul?" Vivian's words sounded like a confession that she herself had long stopped hearing the call of her own heart. At that moment, an invisible connection arose between them, in which every word, every glance had a special weight. Spencer cautiously approached, his hand barely touching hers, and in that gentle touch, a wave of confusion and exhilaration spread. Her heart beat faster, and within her mixed feelings, a slight guilt, as if a reminder of long-promised duties, and a quiet, almost forbidden excitement from the possibility of being heard, seen in a new light. Vivian could not immediately realize that it was at this moment that the forgotten spark within her, which she had hidden for years under the guise of routine life, had awakened. "Vivian," Spencer whispered, as if afraid to disturb this delicate harmony of the moment. Sometimes nature speaks to us in a language we have long forgotten to understand. We forget how important it is to care for every petal of our soul in time. His words, filled with sincerity and amazing tenderness, resonated deep within her soul. She felt the inner barrier that had so firmly guarded her peace beginning to slowly dissipate under the influence of the soft moonlight and words spoken with particular force. The moment seemed like an eternity. The silence of the night, filled with the aroma of jasmine and freshness, created an atmosphere where anything was possible, even the opening of that part of herself that she had suppressed for years. Spencer took a step closer, and his warm presence reminded her that sometimes, to reignite the extinguished fires of the soul, it is enough just to allow herself to hear the voice of her heart. Against the backdrop of the gentle moonlight and the whisper of the night garden, Vivian realized that this moment was not just a meeting of two people, but a moment of awakening when her world began to change. Deep down, she already felt that this night would be a turning point, the beginning of a journey to reevaluate her long-held beliefs and emotions that had been hidden from the world for so long. In this magical hour, on the moonlit terrace, a quiet yet powerful desire was born to be true to herself, to open herself anew, and to allow life to shine with new colors, despite the fear of the unknown. The evening of the corporate gala arrived, and the grand ballroom, located in one of the city's historic mansions, was transformed into a fairy tale space where the sparkling lights of crystal chandeliers and elegant music created an atmosphere of magic. Guests, dressed in luxurious attire, moved through the hall with grace and refinement, as if they themselves had become part of this elegant symphony. Vivian, entering the hall with Grayson, felt the gazes of the numerous attendees upon her. Despite her husband being by her side, she couldn't help but notice her gaze constantly drawn to Spencer. His presence, like a magnet, attracted her attention. Tall, with a casual elegance, he seemed to emphasize his individuality with every movement, as if he knew how to stand out against the backdrop of the luxurious setting. Between them, an invisible tension had already arisen, stirring her soul. The hall was filled with an atmosphere of celebration and tranquility, but within Vivian, a storm of emotions was raging. On one hand, she felt the stability embodied by Grayson, who, with his calm and confident gaze, was a symbol of her familiar world. On the other hand, every time her eyes met Spencer's gaze, she felt long-forgotten desires awakening within her, tempting her with their forbidden allure. Moments seemed both eternal and fleeting, and in her heart, the feeling that change was inevitable grew stronger. During dinner, exquisite dishes were served, and the conversations at the table became increasingly lively. Vivian tried to converse with Grayson, but her thoughts constantly wandered to that gaze she had caught from Spencer. Suddenly, during one of the pauses, Spencer approached her. His words were soft but penetrating. "You are dazzling tonight, Vivian. This evening seems created to awaken in us the true feeling of life." Her voice froze for a moment. Spencer's gaze, full of promises and secret understanding, made her heart beat faster, and her mind filled with confusion. Between them, something had arisen that could not be ignored, an unspoken intrigue, like a soft whisper, shattering the routine calm. Not much time had passed before the music changed, inviting the guests to the dance floor. The hall was filled with new rhythms, and the atmosphere took on an even more exciting hue. Grayson, the ever-gentleman, took Vivian by the hand, confidently leading her to the center of the hall, where the rhythms of swinging orchestras reigned. But as soon as they approached the dance floor, Vivian felt her gaze involuntarily drawn to Spencer, standing at the edge of the hall. His eyes sparkled in the light of the chandeliers, and a subtle smile hinted that he had not left her indifferent. For several minutes, Vivian tried to focus on the dance with Grayson, but every movement, every gentle touch of her husband's hand seemed to her a pale shadow compared to what was happening in her inner world. Flashes of memories of the past terrace, where Spencer had so delicately touched her hand, and his words, like the echo of a long-forgotten melody, continued to resonate in her consciousness. She felt her soul torn between duty and the call of her heart, between obligation and the thirst for novelty. Finally, in one of those moments when the music paused in anticipation of a new rhythm, Spencer unexpectedly approached her on the dance floor. His hand gently touched her shoulder, and instantly, time seemed to stand still. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze was everything: confession, fear, hope, and the promise of change. Vivian felt the whole world around her disappearing, giving way to just the two of them, enveloped in the magic of the moment. "Allow me to lead you," he said softly, his voice quiet but full of determination, and in it rang a sincerity that could not be refused. Doubts and inner conflict raged in her soul, but feeling the warmth of his hand and the strength of his gaze, Vivian, as if inspired, took a step toward the forbidden closeness. She knew that at this moment, the thin line between right and wrong, between the familiar world and the new, unexplored feeling, was being crossed. And yet she allowed herself to dissolve in this dance, in which every touch and every glance were filled with a force capable of turning her life upside down. The dance became for them not just a movement to music, but a silent confession that change was inevitable. The smooth lines of movements, gentle turns, and momentary pauses created an atmosphere where all the emotions hidden until then became apparent. In every turn, in every light touch of the hand, Vivian felt her world beginning to crumble, giving way to something new, unfamiliar, yet tantalizing. Meanwhile, Grayson, watching from the side, tried to catch the invisible threads connecting his wife to the stranger, but could not understand what was happening in her soul. His calm face hid a deep inner turmoil, for he sensed that this evening would be a turning point for all their fates. When the music once again filled the hall, and the dance floor was illuminated by the sparkling lights and smiling faces, Vivian realized that her life would never be the same. On this evening, under the rhythms of the music and the glow of the flickering lights, a spark of change had been ignited within her, which had already begun to burn. And although her heart still wavered between duty and desire, this dance had become the first step on the path to revelation, to the search for her true essence, which had long been hidden under the mask of everyday life. The gala evening continued, and the tension, growing with each glance and each touch, promised that the most important and fateful events were yet to come. In this hall, filled with beauty and the illusion of celebration, Vivian had taken a step toward herself, toward changes that could no longer remain just a quiet echo of the past. The next day, after the tumultuous gala evening, when emotions still lingered in the air, Vivian received an unexpected call. Spencer's voice was soft but resolute, inviting her to meet in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. On neutral ground, where they could speak openly without fear of prying eyes and judgment. The cafe turned out to be a cozy refuge where soft lighting, comfortable sofas, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee created an atmosphere of trust and privacy. In a corner of the establishment, at a table by the window, sat Spencer, his face serious, his eyes filled with uncertainty and concern. He met her gaze as Vivian, somewhat hesitantly, joined him. "Thank you for coming, Vivian," he began, his voice trembling with the weight of the confession. He ran a hand through his hair, as if preparing himself for what he was about to say. "I need to confess something to you." Vivian felt her heart racing. The room was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the soft murmur of other patrons' conversations and the gentle clinking of dishes. Spencer took a deep breath and continued. "My wife, Avery," his voice grew even softer. "She has already suspected much. Last night at the gala evening, she noticed how our gazes met, how there was some special spark between us. And this morning, she said she felt that something had changed." Spencer's words hung in the air like a heavy omen. Vivian could not hide her agitation. Her mind raced between feelings of guilt and that irresistible attraction she felt toward this man. She tried to find the words but was overwhelmed by embarrassment. "What do you mean?" she finally whispered, not taking her eyes off his serious face. Spencer lowered his gaze as if gathering his strength. "I know this is wrong," he said softly, "but I can't deny what I feel. Ever since we first met, I realized that in your eyes lies something I've long been searching for. I tried to suppress these feelings, hoping they would pass, but they only grew stronger, and I could no longer lie to myself or to you." His confession, spoken with sincere pain and passion, made Vivian feel the full complexity of the moment. She looked at him, and in his eyes she saw not only longing, but also a deep sincerity that could wound. Every word Spencer spoke, uttered with a tremble, seemed to her both liberating and devastating. "Spencer," she began, her voice soft, I don't know what to think. This is so unexpected, and I feel torn between duty and what I feel." She faltered, gathering her thoughts, realizing that this conversation would change everything. In her soul, a battle raged between guilt and the spark of something new, so tempting yet so forbidden. Spencer, observing her inner struggle, gently took her hand, as if trying to convey all his support and understanding. "Vivian, I'm not asking you to make hasty decisions," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know the truth. I never wanted to destroy your life or cause pain to Grayson, but our feelings, they defy logic. Maybe honesty, even if it hurts, will help us sort out what's happening inside us." The room seemed filled with tense silence, where every word, every touch, took on the weight of a fateful revelation. Outside the window, the last raindrops tapped gently, creating a rhythmic backdrop that reminded her of the inevitability of change. Vivian took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. "I need time to process all of this, to understand what I feel and how it will affect my life. I love Grayson, and he has always been my support. But now I feel something stirring within me, something I thought had died long ago." Spencer gently squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with compassion and hope. "I will be here, no matter your decision. If you need time or space, I will accept that. But please don't close your heart to what it's trying to tell you." These words, filled with warmth and tenderness, made Vivian ponder how long she had been hiding her true feelings behind the mask of routine life. In the quiet of the cafe, where every second seemed like an eternity, she began to realize that this moment was crucial, life-changing. Perhaps she would have to make a choice that would change everything, but the truth, like a bitter pill, had to be accepted. Late at night, when the city was enveloped in deep silence, Vivian returned to her home, where the familiar walls suddenly seemed alien. Her thoughts still resonated with the frank conversation with Spencer in the cafe. The weight of his words and the inevitability of change weighed heavily on her heart, driving her to wander through the empty corridors, where every rustle echoed with long-forgotten feelings. In the living room, under the soft light of a lamp, Vivian paused before photographs from happy moments in her life with Grayson. Each image reminded her of years filled with love, understanding, and mutual respect. But along with these memories came the realization: time changes everything, and even the strongest foundations can be shaken in the face of honest truth. Deep into the night, when the clock on the wall softly ticked away the seconds, Vivian decided she could no longer remain silent. She found Grayson in his study, where he, immersed in reading, sought solace in old books. His face, always calm and confident, now bore a gentle sadness, as if he already sensed that something had changed. "Grayson, we need to talk," she said in a soft yet determined voice, as if challenging not only fate but also her own fears. He set aside his book and looked at her, with eyes filled with both worry and tenderness. In that moment, in their gazes, lay an endless story woven from decades of shared life, but also the unexpected pain of change. "I know we've been through a lot," Grayson began, his voice soft but steady, "and I've always valued your honesty. What's happened?" Vivian took a deep breath, and the words that had long been pent up in her heart burst forth. "Today I met with someone, with Spencer. His confession, his sincerity, awakened in me something I thought I had long lost. I feel guilty because I love you, but at the same time, I sense that something within me is changing. I can no longer ignore the voice that calls me to change." A heavy silence filled the room, charged with both pain and understanding. Grayson listened attentively, not interrupting, his eyes reflecting the deep sorrow, but also the love that had always been the foundation of their relationship. "I have always believed that honesty is the key to true love," he said softly, taking her hand. "But I did not expect that voice to become so loud. We have lived together for so many years, and I understand that time changes us. Perhaps we need to find a new path to preserve what is dear to both of us." Grayson's words sounded like a quiet call to understanding and forgiveness. Vivian felt that between them, something greater than just a conversation about infidelity or temptation was happening. It was a dialogue between two souls trying to find a way out of the labyrinth of complex emotions. "I am afraid," she confessed, her voice trembling with emotion and pain. "Afraid to lose everything we have built. And at the same time, I cannot deny the force that is awakening within me. I don't know how to choose between the duty we both cherish and the desire to discover what remains of the real me." Grayson gently squeezed her hand, as if trying to convey confidence and support. He was silent for a long time, allowing the silence to speak for him, before adding, "Love is not a static picture. It changes, grows, and endures storms. If honesty demands that we reevaluate our path, so be it. We owe each other openness, even if it hurts. But one thing I promise, I will always respect you and that part of you that seeks the truth." These words became a quiet yet powerful response to all of Vivian's inner turmoil. Deep down, she understood that ahead of them lay an uncertain yet perhaps honest path. The decision remained hers. She could choose to stay in the familiar world or take a step into the unknown to allow herself to be true to herself and Grayson. Vivian looked at her husband, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of her own pain and resolve. Against the backdrop of the soft rustling of the night and the flickering light by the window, they both stood at a crossroads, between preserving the familiar world and opening the doors to a new life, where every word, every emotion had meaning. The truth, like a bitter yet necessary medicine, began to seep into their souls. In this decisive moment, Vivian understood that the choice between duty and sincerity was not just a matter of love, but a path to self-discovery and rebirth. The answer remained unclear, but both knew change was inevitable, and only honesty could show them where their new path would lead. Thus, in the quiet twilight of the night, where destinies intertwined with invisible threads, the process of reevaluating their future began. The decision was not made immediately, but it was already ripening, and its echo promised to change everything they knew about love, duty, and their own essence.